Hello everybody, welcome back to a new tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about mixing, something that I haven't really covered on this channel. But somebody I am collaborating with sent me over a nice introduction part of a song, and we worked on it together. And the main thing was that the intro wasn't really balanced, so there was a lot of work to do there, and that's like basically mixing is of course balancing, making sure that all the elements are sitting in the right place in the mix is what mostly mixing is about. So without further ado, I want to show you the example that he sent me, and we'll kind of go over how you can make it sound a little bit better. Alright, so here's the example that I had here. This is what he sent me, and this is what I made of it in the original track. I had to kind of undo all the things that I did here, so it might not exactly sound the same as what he sent me. But we'll go over it nonetheless and kind of show you what I did, and then I'll try to get this as close to there as possible. So yeah. So it's a really cool sound here, but the main melody here, which comes in a little bit later, at the start you can't really hear it. So right here, this is the main melody, that bell plug sound. You can't really hear it on top of all the other elements, and then once it starts to be audible, it's so far back in the mix that you can't really get the melody out of it. So my main focus was to kind of establish this as your main element, and use that as a guide to my mixing, making sure that this pops out a little bit more. And I think I succeeded fairly well here. I'm going to play you from like halfway in between here, so we don't have to listen for another 50 seconds to it. So that's what I made of it, and it has mostly to do with two things. It has to do with, of course, the volume of different elements. For example, this ARP here in my version has a lower volume than in his version. And it also has to do with things like filtering and using the equalizer to make space for different elements in the mix. So with that being said, let's quickly go over some of the changes I made. And of course, they're all volume and EQ based here. We have, for example, some volume differences here between the main melody here is, as you can see, in my version it's 5 dB louder, because I decided that should be our main focus of this segment here, should be that melody. So I decided to turn it up in volume, which is fairly simple. What is a little bit more interesting is for these background elements, as you can see, I've been filtering out some of the frequencies, so you can really hear that this is more of a background element now. Whereas in the original, it's much more in your face. So I actually want to go over and kind of do the same process I did for this thing here, just with you guys, and kind of explain my thought process. So what I first like to do when I get sent something like this is obviously to see for myself what a main element is, what is the main element of the section, and what are the background or the supporting elements. And for this case, it's fairly clear that it's going to be your main melody here. But this is fairly interesting as the main melody is actually, or the group where the main melody sits in, which is this plug sound here, also houses this other group here. Which you can see is already made like a little bit of a background, so it's not really noticeable in the mix itself. Even with these two, you can definitely hear that this is the main element of that mix. So that was already fine, this was nice sounding, but now we need to take all the other elements and kind of build it around this thing here. Okay, so what I'm going to do with the first one is I'm just going to turn it down. For this one, of course, I saw that the volume was lower, so that's easy. But this is a kind of a decision. Once you know which elements are your central elements, then you can start, affecting the other elements to make them fit more around it. So I'm basically going to do the same setup, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial in the filter until the ARP is kind of like in the background behind our main lead here. So now you can hear that it's barely noticeable, but it's still there. You can hear that if we introduce it while we're playing it. You can definitely hear that something changes once I introduce this. So it's definitely an important element, but it's not overtaking our main element that we have there. But we have some other elements that also are causing some problems, like this thing here. This is also kind of obstructing our main melody here. So I'm going to basically do the same thing. So what I'm going to do for this one is just use the EQ that he already gave me and just kind of bring it down a little bit. For the intro, it's also nice to kind of have the filter sweep open a little bit, so it starts off a little lower in intensity. And then we have this final group of squelches that kind of sit underneath everything. And what I want to do with this is I want to push it out really far to the stereo side. So to do that, I'm just going to throw on a stereo spreading plugin here and just kind of widen it. So now it's going to sit a lot more in the stereo side. And if we now start turning it down with the volume, you can notice that it kind of starts sitting back in the mix a little bit more. Finally, we have this effect sound here, which I didn't really test, but it might be okay already. Could use a little bit less volume. Alright, so I would say that that's a better mixdown compared to what we had before. Now we have the main melody, being audible, and you are able to see which, or to hear which notes are which is important if you have a melody. So I would say that that's a successful mix. Now, obviously, this isn't a full track, so in a full track it's a lot harder to do this because you have different sections, you have some elements that only play, for example, in the drop, while others play in the intro, and you have to balance them towards each other. And what I suggest you do for that is that you always have some elements that kind of overlap. So let's say we have this intro. I might want to have like a pad sound that comes in here, and that kind of does its thing here as like a background pad sound. And then I might have I don't know, a build-up element here that kind of has a reverb tail that kind of goes into the drop, and then I can use that to set the level of my kick and bass, which start here. So by having a few elements that kind of overlap that way, I can compare what this sounds like to what this sounds like, and then I check the volume towards this pad sound here, and then I check the volume of the pad sound to our main intro. And of course there are other tricks too. You can just, you know, click here and see what your final level is, and if it's not too loud, obviously you want your intro to be a little less loud than your actual drop, because that's the main energetic part of your track usually. So yeah, that's some of the tricks you can do to get a nicely balanced mix. And it's of course, with all things audio, it's more practice than anything. Once you have done like 20 mixdowns of your own music, you already know kind of how to make audio or how to sound design so that it works within your mix, which is something I've been doing a lot, instead of, you know, for example, let's say we take this pad sound here where we had the filter, you know, the filtering in. Instead of doing that, what I can do is maybe choose a different waveform here, or a different filter, or just add another filter right on the back here, and kind of get rid of the top end that way. So there's a lot of different things you can do to make something work in the mix. And maybe I could have given this more stereo as well. So that, again, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do there. But the main thing you want to do is you want to identify your main elements, and then you want to see which elements are the background elements, and then you want to turn those down. And I tend to never turn them up, or I kind of hate doing that, because you want to keep a nice level of headroom, and just to stay safe, I like turning down background elements more than turning up my foreground elements. So I hope these tips helped, and if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.